Greetings! I'm Anthony Elmore, President and Founder of the Proud Black Buddhist World Association. We at the Proud Black Buddhist World Association are not only the Black Buddhist force in America, we are the Black Buddhist force in the world. And today we bring you another exciting Black Buddhist History lecture. Our lecture today is Buddhism A Black Prospective by Anthony Elmore. When you think of the Buddhist religion, we must understand that there was a white and Asian practice to extricate all Black Buddhist history, culture, and language from the Buddhist religion. We Black people saw the movie Hidden Figures, and we had no idea that it was a black woman by the name of Katherine Johnson that did the mathematical trajectory that got us Americans not only in space, but thanks to Katherine Johnson, a black woman, we were able to get to the moon. Now, this brings us to our Black Buddhist lecture today. The original Buddhist and Buddha were black people. See, we know this through archaeology, anthropology, literary science, genetic science, and linguistic science, that the people of Magadha came from the Harappan culture, which was all black. There were no white people. However, during the 2nd century AD, a white Kushan king by the name of Kanishka, he conquered India during what is called the Shaka era. Shaka means foreigner in the white language of Sanskrit, and he conquered the people, and he separated Buddhism through race, culture, and language. He created a new Buddhism called Mahayana Buddhism, and this is the time when they separated Buddhism through language, culture, and the language they used to change and extricate black history was called Sanskrit. So, we come to our Black Buddhist lecture. Now, in order to give you an understanding of Buddhism, or the Buddhist religion, you see, we at the Proud Black Buddhist World Association practice the Buddhist teachings as taught by the 13th century black Japanese Buddhist sage by the name of Nichiren. Even in Japan, ladies and gentlemen, there is an effort to extricate not only black Buddhist history, but the Japanese extricate black history of Japan, because the original people of Japan were the Jomon people. Look up the word Jomon, and you will find that the original people of Japan was black people. In fact, that was America's first archaeologist. His name was Dr. Francis Alexander Chamberlain. He writes that even the first shogun of Japan was black. The Japanese actually whitewashed Nichiren and make him white. They extricate all black history. So you need black Buddhist teachers who will go and put black history into Buddhism. Now, one of the things that we want to do to give you an understanding of the Buddhist religion, you see, the Buddhist religion was taken over by Asians, meaning that during the Christian era, when King Kanishka started, that is the time when he extricated all black people out of Buddhism. However, before Buddhism ever made it to China or Japan, it was in Africa 1,000 years before it ever even made it to Japan. The Buddha was there 1,000 years after the Buddha's death. Now, one of the things that we want to do, and we want to delineate Buddhism by what you know as Asian culture. See, there's a difference. People see some Asian on a mountain meditating, and they call this Buddhism. Now, it is Nichiren Shoshu that delineated the difference between Buddhism. See, we who are Nichiren Buddhists or Proud Black Buddhists practice the teachings as taught by Nichiren Shoshu. He had a writing. His writings are called the Gosho. The Gosho are letters that Nichiren wrote to his disciples to teach them Buddhism. Now, to delineate what we know as Buddhism, we got to understand that Buddhism is actually the science. The word Buddha means wisdom, and Buddhism is a science. Now, Nichiren Shoshu has a go show. Now, this go show is called Entity of the Mystic Law. Now, in the Entity of the Mystic Law, Nichiren kind of explains Buddhism, not from the fact that some person sitting up there meditating, but Buddhism is understanding the universal laws that is in our universe. This is how Nichiren explains it. He says, quote, and this is the go show, it's called the Entity of the Mystic Law. It says, quote, these two aspects, the deluded and the enlightened, are indeed two different phenomena, yet both are workings of one principle, that is, the essential nature of phenomena, or the true aspect of reality. It is like a piece of crystal. If the crystal is placed in the sun rays, it will attract them and produce fire. But if it is placed in the moon's rays, it will produce water. The crystal is a single entity, but the effects it produces differ according to the circumstances. Now, he goes on further. The mystic principle is the true aspect of reality. It's like this. The mystic principle of the true aspect of reality is one. But if it encounters evil influences, it will manifest delusion, while if it encounters good influences, it will manifest enlightenment. Enlightenment means enlightenment to the essential nature of phenomena, and delusion is the ignorance of it. The way to get a 21st century understanding of the Buddhist religion is to take the Buddhist religion out of the traditional roles and understand it as we see Buddhism. See, Buddhism is not some Asian on a mountain. Buddhism is understanding the essential nature of the universe. That essential nature of the universe, the Buddha put it in the Lotus Sutra. He put it in the title of the Lotus Sutra. The title of the Lotus Sutra is called Myoho Renge Kyo, and this is actually the essence of the Buddhist teachings. Now, if you want to go and learn Buddhism, the way to learn Buddhism is to follow the way of a Bodhisattva. See, a Bodhisattva does not have to be a Buddhist, but let's give you an explanation of what the Bodhisattva is. See, a Bodhisattva is an ordinary person who takes up a course in his or her life that moves in the direction of Buddha. You and I are actually, or anyone who directs their attention, their life to the practice, to a way of life of a Buddha, is a Bodhisattva. A Buddha is one who does the right thing. Now, in common sense terms, a Buddha is just a person who we call is Christ-like. Now, what I want you to understand, that this is nothing that this is not something that comes from Anthony Elmore. You see, in the 19th century, there was a book put out in 1833 called The Aneclipses. In The Aneclipses, it was written by a British historian by the name of Sir Godfrey Higgins. In the book, The Aneclipses, Godfrey Higgins expressed what we tell you in Buddhism. You see, Godfrey Higgins wrote, he said, the time has now arrived when it becomes proper to enter upon examination of the doctrines of the celebrated Buddha of India, which were the foundations of all mysticism of Western nations. You see, all the religions that we have today came from the Buddhist religion. You see, it was the white people, King Kanishka, and Asians who extricated all Black Buddhist history out of Buddhism. And we must find heroes. See, nowhere in the world there exists a viable Buddhist culture that teach Buddhism inclusive of our Black Buddhist history, culture, and language. Specifically in our Western culture, the Buddhist teachings in regards to black people runs counter to the teachings of the Buddha. Now, let me take you to some writings, and I want you to get your Gosho out, those of you who are Nichiren Buddhists, or you can look it up. Just go to the SGI Nichiren Writings website, and you will read it. Now, there is a Gosho called The Expedient Means and Lifespans Chapters. Now, what you will find is that the way Asians teach Buddhism is not the way that the Buddha Shakyamuni prescribed us to learn Buddhism. See, the Buddha Shakyamuni prescribed that the way to teach Buddhism is through the integration of our customs and the culture of a people. We're not supposed to be doing our prayers in the Shindoku or Japanese language like the SGI, Nichiren Shoshu, and Nichiren Shu, or these Nichiren Shu sects teach. We should teach, Buddhism should be taught inclusive of our culture. Now, this is what Nichiren writes in the Gosho. It's called The Expedient Means and the Lifespans Chapter. And it reads, quote, "When we scrutinize the sutras and treatises with care, we find that there is a teaching about a precept known as following the customs of the region that corresponds to this. The meaning of this precept is that so long as no seriously offensive act is involved, then even if one were to depart some slight degree from the teaching of Buddhism, it would be better to avoid going against the manners and customs of the country. This is a precept expounded by the Buddha. It appears that some wise men who are unaware of this point express extreme views, saying such things as, because the gods are demon-like beings, they are unworthy of reverence, and that this has offended many lay supporters, unquote. You see, what the Buddha taught is that we must practice Buddhism according to our own culture. Now, myself being a proud black man in America, I find it insulting and offensive that Asians and whites have not only extricated all black history, culture, and language from the Buddhist teachings, these Buddhist teachers disregard and disrespect the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha, and they go against the customs of black people. If you are black and you are practicing Buddhism, you should make this a part of your culture, your history. I cannot come somewhere and practice with some Asians. I'm not Asians. Buddhism or the Lotus Sutra teaches us that we must practice according to our own history and culture. The precept the Buddha taught, so long as no seriously offensive act is involved, then if we were to depart in some degree from the teachings of Buddhism, it would be better to avoid against the customs and manners of the country. You see, Nichiren Shonin wrote this in a Gosho. It's called Propagation of the Wise. He said, quote, "The correct teachings of the time can be propagated only by a person of wisdom. That is why Shakyamuni, after expounding all the sutras, entrusted Hinayana Sutras to Nanda and the Mahayana Sutras to Manjushri. Concerning the heart of the Lotus Sutra, however, the Buddha refused to transfer it to any of the voice heroes, such as Ananda, or bodhisattvas such as Manjushri. The Buddha summoned Bodhisattva superior practice and entrusted it to him." You see, Bodhisattva superior practices, ladies and gentlemen, is Nichiren Shonin. See, he gave us a superior Buddhist practice, and that is chanting of Namu Myoho Renge Kyo to an object of worship. We have here the Gohanzan, and this is our superior Buddhist practice. Please understand that it was Mahayana Buddhism, the time in history Whereas not only was all Black Buddhist history, culture, and language extricated from the Buddhist teachings, it was Nichiren Shoshu who challenged the Buddhism of Japan and noted that only the true and correct teachings of Buddhism is the Lotus Sutra. See, Nichiren further explained that the essence of the Lotus Sutra was in the title, and the title of the Lotus Sutra, or chanting the title of the Lotus Sutra, was a direct path to enlightenment. Nichiren noted in the Gosho, it's called the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, and he writes, quote, "It was only when he reached the age of 72 that he first began to intone Myoho Kyo, the Daimoku of the Sutra. However, the people in faraway countries such as China and Japan were unable to hear it at that time. It was over 1,000 years before China heard so much as the name of the sutra, and another 350 or more years before it was heard in Japan." You see, ladies and gentlemen, Asians did not even get the Lotus Sutra until over 1,000 years after the death of the Buddha. Now, there's a Gosho. It's called the Gift of Rice. Now, Nichiren further writes, quote, "When the great teacher Malo compared these passages from the one of the 6th volume of the Lotus Sutra that reads, quote, 'No worldly affairs of life or work are ever contrary to the true reality.' He revealed their meanings and pointed out that although the first 2 sutras are profound, since their meanings is still shallow and fails to approach that of the Lotus Sutra, they relate to secular matters in terms of Buddhism, whereas the Lotus Sutra explains that in the end, secular matters are the entirety of Buddhism." The Gift of Rice also reads, quote, "The true path lies in affairs of this world. The Golden Light Sutra states, quote, 'To have a profound knowledge of this world is itself Buddhism.' The Nirvana Sutra states, quote, 'All of the non-Buddhist scriptures and writings in society are themselves Buddhist teachings and not non-Buddhist teachings,' unquote." It was in 1929 that the father of Black history, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, established a custom whereas Black people should accept not only white history, but it was Dr. Carter G. Woodson who established what we have in America called Black History Month. Why do we have Black History Month? We have Black History Month because white people or white races wrote out all the Black Buddhist history of Black history away from Black people. When I was coming up as a child, we had very few Black heroes because that's the way white races wrote history. And the institutions that teach history extricate Black history. That's the Museum of African American History, because races do not include Black history. Now, this is what Dr. Carter G. Woodson writes about a custom. And this is what he writes. Now listen, this is the father of Black history. And he writes, quote, "Those who have no record of what their forebears have accomplished lose the inspiration which comes from the teachings of biography and history," unquote. You see, ladies and gentlemen, history has proven that the world's most successful Black people are those who embrace their culture, history, and language. What I want you to do is this. Let me put it this way. I want you to listen to President Obama explain what it means to be Black and why is it important that we embrace our culture, our history, and our language. See, it is no problem being Black. You should be great and proud to be a proud Black Buddhist. Let's listen to President Obama tell us what it means to be Black, and we're going to come back and finish this lecture. Let's listen to President Obama.
Race in America is in the eye of the beholder. We call Barack Obama our first African-American president because of the color of his skin. But in truth, he is of course biracial, born of an African father and a white mother from Kansas. The first line of your biography will almost certainly be not something you did, but who you are, right. The first African-American president. And yet, you're half white. You right. were raised by 3 white people, your mother right. and your 2 grandparents.
Right. And an Indonesian you can throw in there.
And an Indonesian. Are you comfortable with this characterization of you?
I am, actually. And the concept of race in America is not just genetic. Otherwise, the one-drop rule wouldn't have made sense. It's cultural. It's this notion of a people who look different than the mainstream, suffering terrible oppression, but somehow being able to make out of that a music and a language and a faith and a patriotism.
Being black meant only the knowledge of your own powerlessness and your own defeat.
Barack Obama once felt quite differently about race.
And the final irony, should you refuse this defeat and lash out at your captors, they would have a name for that too. A name that could cage you just as good. Like paranoid, or militant, or violent, or nigger. The earth shook under my feet, ready to crack open at any moment. I stopped, trying to steady myself, and knew for the first time that I was utterly alone.
The poet William Wordsworth wrote, "The child is the father of the man." So how to reconcile this troubled boy with the man who grew up to be president?
You saw President Obama, who is black and proud. There's nothing wrong with being black and proud. We must understand that Asians and white people extricated all Black Buddhist history, culture, and language from the Buddhist teachings. We must put our history or make our history, culture, and language inclusive of the Buddhist teachings. Now there's a word we talked about in my past lecture on LBJ that's called Sanskritization. See, Sanskritization is the extricating of all Black Buddhist history, culture, and language. There's a ghost show called The 3 Obstacles and the 4 Devils, and this is what the Black Buddhist sage Nichiren Shoshu writes. He writes, quote, "Everyone, regardless of rank or status, considers it natural for children to obey their father, for subjects to be loyal to their sovereign, and for disciples to follow their teachers. Recently, however, it appears that the people of our day, drunk with the wine of greed, anger, and foolishness, make it a rule to betray their sovereign, despise their parents, and scoff their teachers. You should read again and again the previous letter, which I explained that one should of course obey one's teacher, sovereign parents, but should they commit wrong, admonishing them is in fact loyal to them." You see, what we must understand, that for example, I studied Buddhism from the Japanese SGI. In the SGI, or Nichiren Shoshu and Nichiren Shu, these Buddhist sects extricate all Black Buddhist history, language, and culture from Buddhism. In fact, I left the SGI Buddhist sect because it was SGI leader Daisaki Kato who wrote that the Buddha Shakyamuni came from an Indo-Aryan cultural spirit. This man teaches white Buddhism. These Japanese extricate all your Black Buddhist history, culture, and language. It is Nichiren that tells us that we should honor our parents, our teacher, and our sovereign. Now, it was Thurgood Marshall who acted as a parent, teacher, and sovereign, in that because of Thurgood Marshall winning the 1954 landmark case of Brown versus Board Education, making legal segregation of our school systems illegal. See, because of that landmark ruling, Dr. Martin Luther King and other blacks, and later on whites, practiced civil disobedience against the laws, against segregation, to where they had to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and it was Thurgood Marshall, ladies and gentlemen, that made it possible for us to do this. You see, in the case of Thurgood Marshall, in regards to black people worldwide, he acted as our parent, teacher, and sovereign, and we black people owe Thurgood Marshall not only our highest respect and honor, we hold Thurgood Marshall to be a Black Bodhisattva. See, the Lotus Sutra and the teachings of Nichiren opened the doors for this practice. Again, Nichiren writes, and propagation of the wise. The correct teachings of the time can be propagated only by a person of wisdom. In American history, America had its first black president to be elected and served. Black people or African Americans have many firsts. We at the Proud Black Buddhist World Association are the first independent Black Buddhist sect in our modern world. We as Proud Black Buddhists clearly teach inclusion of our Black Buddhist history, or our Black history included in our Buddhist practice. You see, those who practice with the Asian teachers, they are not what you call Proud Black Buddhists, because they practice Sanskritization or the extrication of their Black Buddhist history. See, our embrace of Thurgood Marshall is following the precepts of the Buddha Shakyamuni, who explains that Buddhism should be taught in relationship to the customs of a people. We chant Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Now the word Namu means to awaken or to give reverence. Now, we awaken to the fact that Thurgood Marshall, in order to bring justice, fairness to not only black people, but to all citizens of America, Thurgood Marshall mastered his knowledge of the Constitution. Now, we call this Myo. See, the word Myo means correct. It also means to open. So Thurgood Marshall opened his mind to the correct teachings of the Constitution. That's Myo. And the correct teaching of the Constitution is the law. Law means whole. Now, Thurgood Marshall did what we call Renge. Renge is the symbol for lotus, and the symbol for lotus means the law of cause and effect. So Thurgood Marshall used the law of cause and effect, and he practiced what is called Kyo. Now, in the Gosho, the Daimoku of the Lotus Sutra, it reads, quote, and he talks about the word Kyo. Nichiren writes, within the single character of Kyo are contained all the sutras in the worlds throughout the 10 directions. It is like a wish-granting jewel that contains within it all manners of treasures of the vastness of space that encompasses all phenomena. And because this single character Kyo of Myoho Renge Kyo is the supreme achievement of the Buddha's lifetime of teachings, the other 4 characters, Myoho Renge Kyo, likewise surpass all other 80,000 doctrines that the Buddha taught. We chant Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo includes the history of Thurgood Marshall. See, let's give you a little history. See, Thurgood Marshall was born in Maryland in 1908. Now, you got to realize now, in 1930, he applied to the University of Maryland Law School but he was denied admission, not because he was a good student, but he was denied admission because he was black. Black people suffered some of the worst inhumanity against humanity in America. These laws, Plessy versus Ferguson, where white people had separate but equal. It was in the mind of Thurgood Marshall to one day attack this injustice, not only against black people, but it's an injustice against Americans, and it's an injustice against humanity, these Jim Crow laws. Now, let me explain what is important. You see, Thurgood Marshall had the fortune. See, in Buddhism, or in the Lotus Sutra, it reads, the Lotus Sutra is like a great physician that is able to change poison into medicine. Now, how did Thurgood Marshall change poison into medicine? Even though he did not go to the University of Maryland, but he went to Howard University in Washington, D.C., and he had the fortune to meet the new dean of the law school. Now, this dean was named Charles Hamilton Houston. Now, Dr. Charles Hamilton Houston instilled in all of his students the desire to apply the tenets of the Constitution to all Americans. Paramount in Houston's outlook was the need to overturn the 1898 Supreme Court ruling, Plessy versus Ferguson, which established the legal doctrine, separate but equal. Marshall's first major court case was in 1933 when he successfully sued the University of Maryland to admit a young African American, even though he couldn't go to the University of Maryland, but he sued that university and opened the door so other blacks could go. Thurgood Marshall called at Howard University was not just to be an attorney. What they taught the black people at Howard University, that you must use the Constitution. You must be a training ground to change not only America, but to change the world. And the people who went to the law school at Howard University, they became people who fought for freedom, justice, and equality for all people. This is why Thurgood Marshall is a great black bodhisattva. He is a hero. You see, Thurgood Marshall worked for the NAACP. See, Thurgood Marshall, in Thurgood Marshall, we have black people have an excellent model of black people to look at. Just as Thurgood Marshall became the most noted constitutional scholar in American history, we at the Proud Black Buddhist World Association are like the Dr. Charles Hamilton Houstons, who motivated Thurgood Marshall and the law students at Howard University to master the Constitution. While Thurgood Marshall mastered the Constitution, we teach black people to learn your history or to learn archaeology, anthropology, literary science, genetic science, to challenge the racism in Buddhism. What is going to happen is that we are going to change people. We're going to lift the spirits of black people up. And they are going to challenge the racism. Are they going to take on the Daisaki Keita of the SGI who wrote that the Buddha comes from the Indo-Aryan culture spirit? We're going to challenge the racists who teach sacralization, who teach the Aryan invasion theory, and that the Buddha was a Hindu. We are going to challenge all of this because we teach Black Buddhist history. It is the proud Black Buddhists that stood up and challenged the racism. And it may not be Anthony Elmore, but it's going to be young people who come after me who's going to challenge the racism in Buddhism, ladies and gentlemen,